So if you're thinking about doing a podcast, I highly suggest you use Anchor, and here's why. Now, first things first, it's free, and you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. I'm talking dollar bills, y'all. Plus, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you to the major platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a bunch of others, so that's one less thing you got to worry about. And they got all the tools you need to record and edit your podcast in one spot, and you can do all that from your phone or your computer, so in my opinion, it's really the easiest way to make a podcast. Now, if that's what you're looking for and you're ready to jump on it, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. What up, though? Welcome to Tamara to the Break of Dawn, the show where you'll literally ride my train of thought as I discuss the different types of challenges and struggles that we all can relate to. I'm your host, Tamara Dawn, and I want to thank you so much for tuning in today. Now, you already know the struggle could be way too real sometimes, so my hope is that these shows will challenge and inspire you as I basically share the areas that I'm trying to grow in. So let's get it. Alright, so before the podcast got up and going, I had reached out to a few family members and a few friends and asked for topic suggestions. I knew I kind of had the basic premise of the show, but I didn't want it to only be just me talking about what I'm going through. I wanted there to be some sort of variety in the show. I'm random, so I wanted that, it to reflect how I am. And so we are going to have listeners' choice episodes sprinkled throughout, because I really do at times want to talk about the things that people actually want to hear about, as long as, one, I actually have an opinion about the topic, because there are just some things that I don't maybe have a strong enough opinion about that I don't, I'm not going to talk about it. If it's not helpful for me to talk about, I'm probably not going to talk about it. And then if I just don't have any knowledge of the topic whatsoever. So other than that, though, I am going to, have these shows kind of, like I said, sprinkled throughout. And today's episode is kind of the culmination of a few things. One, I was asked to talk about toxic friendships and then also boundaries with toxic family. But then I've also just kind of noticed some toxic traits within interactions that I've had with people. So here we are. And what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to define a few things, because I think it's very important that I'm crystal clear and you fully understand where I'm coming from, what I mean. So I actually looked up the definition of toxic, the definition of the word trait, and then I found this article that kind of like defines what a toxic relationship is versus a healthy relationship. So I'm going to do those things first, and then I'm just going to talk about a few toxic traits that I notice that are not this list is not at all the things out here that we could talk about. And I'm sure I'll revisit, this topic as far as different toxic traits again several times, because it's just, I'm a firm believer that toxic people will have toxic interactions with people, which then will wound somebody. So then you have these toxic relationships. And I think that then toxic relationships create toxic, households, communities, societies. And I just feel like part of the issue in society, besides the fact that social media gives us this platform that some people I just don't think are responsible enough to handle that privilege that they have to have a platform. Like, I want to be heard, so I have this podcast, you know what I mean? But it is a huge responsibility that I have to, take it serious, the fact that literally anybody could hear this. And I just think people don't take that into consideration when they say and do certain things. And I just think that, so then we have this platform And then I just think we a lot of times have these toxic people, or not necessarily fully toxic, I can't even talk, toxic in a malicious way, but just toxic traits, and then they project that on people, and it just continues to cause issues. The cycle continues, and I just think that it's important for us to be in healthy relationships, working on ourselves and whatever. So, like I said, I looked up some stuff, and so toxic, we'll start there. Acting as or having the effect of a poison. I wasn't even, sorry. Anyways, poisonous, a toxic drug, causing unpleasant feelings, harmful or malicious. So that's what toxic is. Trait is a distinguishing characteristic or quality, especially of one's personal nature. So a toxic trait is basically a poisonous characteristic. Yes, I chose the most extreme part of that, the part where it focuses on poison, because as I said, I already gave the example of how it just basically being toxic ruins the world. Like, that's just my opinion, and that's why I talk so much about being emotionally, mentally, and, you know, for me it's important, like I say, to be spiritually healthy. So, that being said, what is a toxic relationship? Like, we talked about what the traits are of just being toxic, but what does that look like in a relationship? Because I really just do not think sometimes that people realize that certain things are actually toxic. People, a lot of times, and I've been there, and sometimes, I haven't arrived anywhere. I have toxic traits. I talk about them. But I feel like it's one thing to be aware of a toxic trait and then realize it's toxic and then want to work on it and try to strive to be better. And then there's another thing when you have this mindset of just, well, that's just how I am, and you just gonna have to deal with it. No, you just gonna have to be friends or in a relationship with somebody else, because you don't even want to grow. And being stagnant, is really just not an option for me. I'm constantly someone who's trying to focus on something to better myself, or, you know, not just something, you know what I mean? Like, grow. I don't want to be the same tomorrow as I was today, let alone a year, 5, 10 years from now, be the same person. I think that is just very sad. And so, a toxic relationship, let's dive into that one. I found this article. I don't know if I said that earlier, but I found this article. So this isn't like something I came up with on my own. I'm just going to add my own opinions to all this stuff. So by definition, and I'm a pause at some parts because this is wild when I found this. So by definition, a toxic relationship is a relationship characterized by behaviors on the part of the toxic partner that are emotionally and not infrequently physically damaging to their partner. So, emotionally and sometimes physically damaging to your partner. Okay? While a healthy relationship contributes to our self-esteem and emotional energy, a toxic relationship damages self-esteem and drains energy. So toxic relationships are draining, whereas a healthy relationship is more so life-giving. It's giving you life instead of just sucking it away. Okay? A healthy relationship involves mutual caring, respect, and compassion, an interest in our partner's welfare and growth, an ability to share control and decision making. In short, a shared desire for each other's happiness. Mutually caring, mutually beneficial. It's not one-sided. A healthy relationship is a safe relationship, a relationship where we can be ourselves without fear, a place where we feel comfortable and secure. A toxic relationship, on the other hand, is not a safe place. A toxic relationship is characterized by insecurity, self-centeredness, dominance, control. We risk our very being by staying in a toxic relationship. To say a toxic relationship is dysfunctional is at best an understatement. When I first read that, that's just a lot. Like, I could stop this show right there, drop the mic, and go on, and you can just listen to that over and over again, because that in and of itself is crazy. Like, that doesn't sound like anything remotely like any of us should be involved in. But the sad part is, there are so many people in toxic relationships because they don't understand that it's toxic behavior, and or maybe they don't feel like they're worth, being treated better. I saw this this video on Instagram recently. There's this dude I follow. His name's Ace Metaphor, so you can follow him if you want to. He talks a lot about relationships and healthy relationships and kind of pointing out toxic stuff. And one of the things he said recently on a video that I watched recently, who knows when he actually recorded it, but it said, let me get it right, but you can go look him up and find it. But what I remember is it said, before you get into a relationship, you have to be ready. You have to be ready for it to work. Okay, which that makes sense. What I didn't expect him to say is you also have to be ready for it not to work, and to be ready to walk away if you need to. Because ultimately, now this is me adding my own stuff, you're in a toxic relationship when it's not working out and you're not being treated right, and you just continue to stay. And so he, kind of said something to the effect of, if you're so fragile that something working out is going to completely destroy you, then you're not ready to be in a relationship, because you need to be willing to walk away if you need to. So I'll just throw that out there. Toxic relationships are just cancer. They're poison. It says being toxic is poison. So let's move on to some toxic traits that you might be toxic if you do this, or the person you're in a friendship or intimate relationship with, or your family member, they might be toxic if they're doing this. And then if you are doing this, you need to kind of start doing some stuff differently, because let's not contribute to the detriment of our society. Let's not do that. And then if someone is treating you that way, kind of like he said, you need to be okay with walking away, because I'm sorry, you, whoever you may be, and I don't care who you are, no one deserves to be mistreated. No one should have to put up with that. And if you are putting up with that, why? Why do you not think that you are worth more than that? And I saw another meme that somebody posted that said, him, I love you. And it said, me with my wounded self. Why though? I love that it said my wounded self, because I just think only damaged people believe that they don't deserve love. That's just my opinion. And I'm somebody who is wounded. So I know, I'm in process, healing, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but I'm just saying, I speak from experience, and sometimes you don't know that you've been mistreated until somebody comes along and treats you like they're normal. To you is whoa, what? Why are you doing this? That means you done been through some things. I've had experiences like that where guy friends would do things, that's just who they are as a person. They weren't trying to gain anything from it or whatever, but it was just mind-blowing to me. Why are you like this? You're like a unicorn. No, really, that's just how you're supposed to be treated, And so let's get into it though. So you might be toxic if you are the kind of person who apologizes for something without changed behavior when you continue to apologize for the same behavior over and over again. I am a firm believer that that is manipulation. If you continue to do the same thing over and over again and you apologize for it over and over again and you don't change your behavior, I believe you are being manipulative. I believe that you are really just trying to, your apology is really just you trying to pacify or appease that person to kind of keep them how you want them to be, so you don't want to lose that relationship. You don't want to lose maybe the power you feel like you have in that relationship. And this all sounds very malicious, and I mean, really it kind of is. Even if it's not your intent, you are not operating in a healthy way, and that's why I'm just trying to expose it, because maybe you don't know, but if you do know, that is very malicious, and you need to stop. And then if you are on the other side of that, experiencing that, you need to establish some boundaries. So that's a great segue to the next section. If you are someone, so we'll start here. Let's say someone establishes a boundary. Boundary is a limit. This is how far I want to go. This is how far you want to go. Think of it as the white picket fence that you might have up if you don't want your dog to get out of your yard. Like, that's the boundary, is the fence. Do not cross this fence, do not pass go, do not collect $200, none of that, right? If you are someone who doesn't respect someone's boundaries and you get all upset because they're trying to establish a boundary because they don't want to be treated a certain kind of way, you are toxic. Who am I, who are you, who are any of us to not respect someone's boundaries? They have that boundary for a reason, whatever it may be. And it's not, usually it's like a boundary is usually not something to harm anyone else. It's usually to protect themselves or whatever, their own accountability or whatever. Boundaries usually only affect you if it doesn't allow you to get what you want or manipulate or whatever. That's the only time I personally feel like anyone would get upset about somebody establishing a boundary, is because then, you know, this boundary doesn't serve whatever purposes they have. That's very toxic thinking and behavior, and like you need to stop if you're doing that. And then if you're allowing someone to make you feel guilty for establishing a boundary, or if you are someone who doesn't establish boundaries, that's kind of toxic too, because if you don't establish a boundary, people will just treat you however they want to treat you. And we can't assume that, well, they should just know. We wasn't all raised the same. So what you think is cool and how whatever, that might not be good for me. And if I don't establish that boundary, you're probably going to just keep doing whatever. And then I might be getting upset about it because it's like, why don't you know? Because I didn't tell you. So that's not even your fault. So it's toxic of me or you to not establish a boundary. So there's that. Another, you might be toxic if you invalidate someone's feelings. So what does that look like? Let's say someone, I don't know. Let's say someone says, when you didn't respond to my text, we'll just keep it light at first. Let's say they're like, that made me feel rejected. Okay, now let's pause for a second. Because you not responding to their texts, or maybe we'll even say you don't come to their event that they invited you to, it doesn't necessarily mean that you were trying to reject them, because you might have been busy, you could have been sick, something could have came up, whatever. With the texting, you could have been busy. Maybe you're not a person who always has your phone on you. I'm kind of more that way. I like always have my phone on me. I don't necessarily, it doesn't mean I'm always on my phone, but I always have my phone somewhere near me. And so unless I'm like actually busy, I usually respond to people. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't mean that was your intent. Okay, so let's say that. I'm not saying you were being malicious, but to say that they don't really feel that way, so you're invalidating their feelings, that's toxic. It just is. Now, I think people do that because they get defensive, because they don't want their intentions to be misunderstood, so I can understand that. But what you could say is, I'm sorry that you feel that way, that wasn't my intent, and then y'all talk about it. A lot of times that's what I do. Like, if my kids or whoever tells me something that I do makes them feel some kind of way, I'm usually like, well, I'm sorry, that was not my intent, and then we talk about it. You have to communicate. You have to be open to constructive criticism. You have to be open to feedback within relationships. And then if you're not, that's toxic too, because I'm sorry, ain't none of us perfect. That's why I don't edit out when I mess up. I just say excuse me and keep it pushing, because I mess up in real life when I'm talking to them. My kids make me mad because I could be in a whole serious conversation and slip up on a word, and then they'll start laughing, and I'll be like, okay, let's focus on whatever it is, whatever. But none of us are perfect. None of us are, we're going to hurt somebody because we're imperfect, flawed people. So that doesn't mean our intent was to hurt them, but because people oftentimes, until different things make them realize they're not, but a lot of times we are walking around as the sum total of our experiences. So it's like we are the fruit, I guess, of what we've been through, and sometimes that's been a lot of pain and heartache. So we may take things more offensively than it was intended by the person that we're interacting with. And so then that doesn't mean, though, that you're a malicious person when this happens. It's just we're all flawed people, and we have to understand each other if we're going to be in relationship with each other. And if we're not willing to at least try to see where someone's coming from, and we're so busy trying to tell them, nah, you don't feel that way, whatever, that's toxic. So there's that. Also, and I'm gonna go here, I think that in the vein of confrontation, etc., I think that social media subliminals in place of a confrontational conversation is very toxic. And it's funny because I can't even, it's like I've done it, but not in that way, because usually when I post stuff, I don't, like, either the person isn't my friend or whatever on Facebook, or they're just not somebody that would see it. So it's like it's subliminal, but it's not, because they're not going to see it. So I've done it. But if it's to where it's about a specific person, I don't usually do that, just because I think it's just more important to honor and respect relationships, have those hard conversations so that you can grow together. I remember a really good friend of mine, it doesn't matter what he did. And it's like what he did wasn't even like malicious. It's just the way, I guess the lack of communication about a situation is the best way to describe it. But I was really hurt by it, because I felt that this was somebody that he would have, communicated better and been just pretty open about the situation. And it's not anyone I was dating, or it ain't that type of situation at all. It's just a friend that's been a friend for a long time, who's somebody solid, who, it just is what it is. And I remember thinking, like, I have to tell him, because if he's supposed to be someone who I always say is my friend, I owe it to him to tell him that I was offended, because I can't, smile in his face or interact with him and I got this, like, beef in my heart, because I was, like, really just offended. And so I texted him and was like, hey, at first I text him, and then he was like, well, can we talk? And the reason why I didn't call at first is because he's, like, super busy, and so it's kind of like, I wanted to more so him initiate the conversation because his schedule was busier than mine or whatever. And so we talked about it, and we talked for like an hour. And if I'm honest, I think our friendship was better, and we had a really good friendship prior to that, but I think because we did that hard work of talking through conflict, our friendship was actually better after that, just because it's like we had weathered a storm that really could have damaged 20-year friendship, if I would have just not said anything and just, but one of the things I do is when I feel like I know somebody, it's like, okay, I have to have some self-talk, like, so-and-so has never really done anything like this before, so why would I take it this way? I need to know why. And so that's why we had to have that conversation. And so I think it's important to have those conversations. I think that if all you do is have subliminals on social media and you don't actually have that hard conversation with someone, I think that's very toxic. And then we're going to go on a little kind of like sidebar of that, because I saw a video, I don't know if he has a podcast. It's this rapper, this dude named KB, and they did this whole, I guess, video. I think it might be a podcast, I don't know, but I follow all these, like on Instagram, that's where I don't follow all the celebrities, but that's where I follow like some celebrities, because it's just, other people's lives and it's interesting and whatever. But he was saying how social media is supposed to supplement real life. It's not supposed to substitute real life. And so I just think if social media is your life, now let's pause, because I know in this day and age, this podcast, so I know social media is important. There are people that's how they make their money, but at the same time, that is not supposed to be your entire life. That is just supposed to be a supplement of it. And I remember reading an article a long time ago that was saying how social media, a lot of times, if that's your only way of interacting with people, you actually end up feeling more lonely than anything, because it's not real. And then it also creates just unrealistic expectations, and you seeking validation from likes and reacts and shares and want to go viral, and then you see people post just the most foolish stuff just to go viral, and it's like, that cannot be where your validation comes from. So that's toxic if your validation comes from social media, simply because the culture is ever shifting, and what's hot and viral now or whatever, a week from now people might have forgot about it. Sometimes that could be good when something crazy happens and maybe you get exposed or whatever. The good thing about that is that people will move on to the next trend or whatever. But then if you're someone who is seeking validation from social media, that's not good, because then you got to constantly be chasing that validation. So that's toxic if you're someone who only has your life, or like you've substituted real life with social media life. And I'm gonna kind of end it on this note. And like I said, this is not the end all be all list. This is just some stuff I really wanted to talk about today, and I know I'll revisit this topic in some form or fashion in the future, because toxic traits are just, it's important that they're exposed so that you can choose to grow, or if you choose to remain stagnant and just dwell in that mess, then people can decide whether or not they want to be in relationship with you. But I'm gonna end it with this topic anyway. We'll see how long I talk about it. So I saw a meme recently. There's so many memes about toxic stuff. It's so interesting. It said, unpopular fact: there is still grief involved with letting a toxic person go. That's true. Because here's the thing, and let's look at it, from the toxic drug definition earlier. Sometimes toxic people can be addictive because they're not all bad. There is some good woven, within, almost like drugs. It's like people do drugs for a reason. They don't do them necessarily because they're trying to kill themselves or whatever. And I'm thinking more hardcore drugs. And we're not about to have this whole discussion about drugs, but I'm just saying, like, people are trying to numb a pain. So drugs serve a purpose, but where it becomes an issue is when it just becomes, really, for one, numbing your pain is not healthy because you need to really deal with that and heal so you can grow. That's number one. I think that if you just continue to numb it, you have to numb it forever. Like, you can't stop numbing it because it's going to be there waiting for you when you come down. But drugs are addictive, and so are toxic people at times. They have either a good personality or there's something about them that you're drawn to, And so there is grief with letting that person go. There is sadness. There is whatever. That's normal. But just because you're lonely and you miss whatever, that don't mean you reach out to that person. You need to grieve, and you need to go through that grieving process. Just like a death, it is a process. There will be triggers, I've been through it with friendships with the opposite sex that were toxic that I walked away from, but then you miss that person. I've been through that, and I've had to block people on social media and all these things so that there would be a process. If I wanted to reach out to them, I had to delete their number from my phone, all this stuff. And then it's kind of like me having to do all that is too much, and it kind of stops you. Because in moments of weakness and maybe loneliness, you might reach out. I know I have, and that's why I had to be a little bit more extreme in the way I do stuff, because then it makes you think a little bit before you whatever. But it's kind of like you need to grieve, and you need to not go back to a toxic person just because you're lonely, because like I saw on a different meme, it said don't go back to a toxic person just because you're lonely, because just because you're thirsty, it doesn't mean that you should drink poison. And so the thing about grief, when you think about it in relation to death is final. It really is. You can't, unfortunately, I wish I could bring certain people back from the dead, if that was possible. But you cannot. And so death is final. And so grief is something that you have to continually work through. And it needs to be that way with letting go of toxic people. It really needs to be that is final. As long as they're operating in a toxic manner, it does not mean that you go back to it just because you can. It needs to be that you work through that grief, and it needs to be that you might need to go to therapy. You might need to join a support group. You might need to find a mentor, find an accountability partner to just hold you accountable to staying out of this mess, especially when it gets into domestic violence and stuff like that. Have a plan in place to a way of escape, because like I said at the beginning, toxic traits ultimately it's a poison that it's cancerous to society, and we just really need to work on ourselves, and then also not engage in toxic behavior, because sometimes it's your absence that ultimately wakes somebody up. Sometimes you need to walk away from people for them to wake up. Sometimes it's not, oh, I'm just going to love them unconditionally and let them walk all over you. No, and then forgiveness, which we'll talk more in depth about forgiveness in probably a later episode. I'm not going to go into it too much, but one thing you need to remember about forgiveness is that forgiveness does not mean you have to re-engage with the person. You don't even have to tell them that you forgive them, because ultimately forgiveness is for you. It's not for them. Unforgiveness, and I've seen this, I've heard this for years. I might have heard it first in school or something, but unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Unforgiveness is poisonous and very toxic to your own self. So forgiveness frees you from them. It's basically, Fresh Start is this like ministry. They, what is it? They, okay, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. It's canceling the debt. Having unforgiveness is saying, you owe me, pay me what you owe me. But forgiveness is canceling the debt and saying, you don't owe me anything, and it frees you. Because otherwise, when you have unforgiveness, you're walking around with these people that you are choosing not to forgive, chained to you and weighing you down. So it's like, forgiveness is for you, so it doesn't mean that you have to re-engage in relationship with them. When people say, oh, well, if you forgive me, how come? Nah, that don't mean nothing, because forgiveness is for you. So that doesn't mean you have to get back with them if they're still the same toxic person. And then you know what? Sometimes, because forgiveness is not a one and done, forgiveness is a choice over and over and over and over and over and again. And sometimes it's, I don't know, you just gotta let it go. Sometimes, even if you forgive, there can be things that are triggers and whatever. And I just think sometimes, like I said, it doesn't mean you have to re-engage. So go through that grief process when you get out of those toxic situations. And I really hope that if you heard something in here that either A, you recognize in yourself, and or B, you recognize in somebody that you're in relationship with, I just really hope that you kind of take to heart what was said and act accordingly to become healthier or to be in a healthier situation. Because like I said, no one deserves to be mistreated, so no one deserves you mistreating them if you're acting in a toxic way. And you don't deserve to be mistreated. So let's do what we got to do to be healthy and not, add to the foolishness that's already out in the world. So that's all I got for y'all. Until next time. So first things first, shout out to Sniper T for the outro beat, and all his information can be found in the episode notes. But I'm not playing when I say I want y'all to interact with me, so here's a few ways you can do that, and the links to all these methods are in the episode notes as well. Alright, so you can leave me an audio message, and make sure you let me know if you want to remain anonymous, because you might just end up on a future episode. You can email me. Hey, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram, and I'll definitely follow you back. Go ahead and slide in the DMs, just not on no weird stuff. You can like the Facebook page, and the link on there goes to my email as well. And then what I'll do on Mondays, depending on how much y'all interact with your girls, I'll do a response episode, add a little razzle dazzle of other stuff I think y'all might like. So audio message, email, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook page, just whatever, just holla at your girl.